On today's episode of Locked On Wild, don't take these San Jose Sharks lightly.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at how the Minnesota Wild can rebound from their 5-1 loss to the Los Angeles Kings on Tuesday night. We'll also take a look at who could potentially fit in on the second line with Matt Boldy and Eriksson, because we started to see the performance dip a little bit from a certain member of that second line that will not be named. And we'll take a look at the San Jose Sharks playing their best hockey of the season. And guess what? Their power play is not great either, so definitely something's got to give when these two teams square off tonight. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021, credentialed media member, and it's not that the Wild lost their game against the Los Angeles Kings on Tuesday, because I would argue, other than the Philly game, that was really the first clunker of the season for the Minnesota Wild. They led 1-0, and when Kirill Kaprizov got a puck to the face and had to leave the game to get stitches, that's when things seem to completely fall apart. And I guess that's understandable, considering that Kirill Kaprizov out of the lineup, you're probably not going to have a good time. But there are some things that just bear a good lesson as to why we shouldn't be surprised that that sort of thing happened in the Los Angeles Kings game, because Minnesota Wild just went away from their game when Kirill came out of the lineup. They tried to do way too much. John Hines talked about being, going more of an east to west as opposed to fully attacking north to south. A lot of just trying to do way too much against the Los Angeles Kings. And it was a game up until then, up until the point that Kaprizov left, the Wild were pretty convincingly handling the action. They had, I think, a 7-1 shot differential early on and had done basically everything that you needed to do except score. But then it seemed like frustration kind of started to eke in, and the chances just weren't as great. And it led to a game that really slipped away. And the Los Angeles Kings, once they turned it on and realized that they were going to be able to get the upper hand, they never looked back. And it was a pretty convincing performance for the Kings, who are playing some pretty darn good hockey this year. I think they're surprising people with just how good they have been so far. I expected, as many did, I expected that they were going to have a rough season. And even coming off of a back-to-back, a game that they played against the Nashville Predators the night before that was pretty intense, they just went and got it. They went and took it. We talk about these games throughout the season that are just there up for grabs. That was one that the Los Angeles Kings did what they needed to do to take control and to come away with the win. But it is a good lesson for the Wilds to learn, because it was pretty evident that once the Wild started worrying more about the splash and the sizzle and the flashy plays, as opposed to simply doing what they needed, the fundamentals, the details, as John Hines talks about, once they got away from the details and tried to style their way back in to beating the Kings, it was over. And so it bears a good reminder that as much as the team may want to try to do things fun and flashy, you got to just put your head down and just outwork the other team. If you don't outwork the other team, you're not going to have a good time when you're out there on the ice. And the Wild didn't do that against the Kings. So getting back to working hard and controlling the puck, winning battles along the boards, it's all the grimy stuff that doesn't make SportsCenter's top 10 or doesn't make the highlights on X. It's all the stuff that has led to so many of the Wild's goals so far this season, but it's unheralded. It's unheralded, and I get why. Look, if I were out there on the ice, I wouldn't be super enthused to be doing those things either, but it's stuff that has to be done, and it matters. The results show that anytime you can contribute those extra effort plays, I can think of off the top of my head 5 instances right now in which somebody for the Minnesota Wild doing a little extra has directly led to a goal. I think of the work by Marco Rossi behind the net on that spinorama pass by Kirill Kaprizov to Matt Zuccarello for the backdoor tap-in, which I believe was against the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think of that. I think of Matt Boldy working along the boards and tipping the puck past a defender and working it all the way down behind the net to set up Marcus Johansson for a one-timer. Details matter. Details are the way in which you can gain the upper hand on your opponent, and the Wild got away from that against the Los Angeles Kings. They haven't, to this point, really had large stretches of undisciplined play, and so it's not a concern. It's not a problem at this point. It's just taking your eye off the prize, taking your foot off the pedal, and something that the Wild just need to really get back to when they go up against the San Jose Sharks here tonight. We'll talk about the Sharks later in the show. They're playing their best hockey of the season. In fact, they have picked up their 4 wins in the last 5 games, and they represent a team that if you take them lightly, can very easily win. We'll go through the opponents that they've played, but the Minnesota Wild have to come in hungry and have to be aggressive and be ready to do everything that they need to do in order to come away with wins on this little mini road trip. These are all games that before the Tuesday night debacle, these are all games coming up that we looked at and said, this is a great opportunity for the Wild to go 4-0. I still think it is a great opportunity for the Wild to go 4-0. When you play the San Jose Sharks, you play the Anaheim Ducks, you play the Chicago Blackhawks, and you play the Montreal Canadiens. You should win all 4 of those games. But it's a perfect example, a perfect reminder of what happens when you focus on other things or you kind of just assume that you're going to be able to go into any game and win because you have won so far this season. That's not how it works. You got to go in and you got to take control and you got to take the game away from your opponent. If you don't, then you're on the wrong end of a loss and you just kind of are scratching your head as to how did we get to this point? But John Hines talked about it after the game, and he said, great learning opportunity. And I think the actual quote that was used is sometimes you need a little bit of a kick in the nether regions to get you back on track. It's a wake-up call. I called it a wake-up call after the loss, and I think that is a pretty apt description of it. The Wild were humming along, cruising along, great road trip, and we're just coming off of the win against the Toronto Maple Leafs, who I will say I think are way better than their record indicates. But you maybe just assumed that because you beat a team like Toronto that you're going to be able to roll in your home arena and just take it to the Los Angeles Kings, and that's not how it works. You gotta be ready to fight every night, or you're going to get punched in the mouth, and it's not going to be fun. So it's a wake up call. It's an adjustment opportunity. It's a lesson for this Minnesota Wild team, but it's one that I think should carry into this entire road trip is just don't take your opponents lightly. Don't assume because you beat the best of the best that you can just roll your way through the rest of the competition. There are some things that I would like to see because I think we're getting to the point now where there may need to be changes made. So we'll take a look at line 2 and we'll talk about what needs to happen for that line, especially to get back on track, because it's been a few quiet performances in a row for that second line, which is not ideal. The Wild need that line to be able to contribute at the same level that the Kaprizov line has. So we'll talk about potential fits for line 2. And I'm going to tell you right off the bat, Ryan Hartman's not going to be included. I'll tell you why after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. As we sit right in the heat of the NFL, college football, the NBA, and the NHL, there is no better time to be able to buy tickets to see your favorite teams in action. And Game Time makes the process so easy. You can spend more time worrying about where you're going to tailgate before watching your favorite college football team, where you're going to go after the game is done, and where you are going to spend the rest of your evening. That's where your attention should go, and Game Time can help make ticket buying as easy as possible. Right now, Game Time is having an exclusive zone deal for the NHL Winter Classic event at Wrigley Field. Go to the Game Time app to purchase tickets and get 10% off bleacher seating and 20 to 25% off on home plate area seats. Don't miss this deal and take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. That includes tonight's Thursday night football game between the Ravens and the Bengals. You can go with Joe Burrow and the Bengals, or you can take one of the MVP frontrunners in Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens to keep things rolling. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, as in tonight's game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Wild for the rest of the week as we recap what happens tonight against the San Jose Sharks, as well as tomorrow night's game against the Anaheim Ducks. We'll have recap episodes for you, and so we'll get back on the postcast trail probably next week. But for now, we'll do recap episodes, and so we'll have whatever happens tonight. We'll have you covered for tomorrow as well. So, little bit of a cliffhanger there by saying we might need to be looking into some options for line 2 because it's starting to become a little bit of an issue for this Minnesota Wild team. And I'm going to go to the direct performance because we had another light day for a couple of key components in the Minnesota Wild top 6, notably Marcus Johansson, no shots on goal, 1 block, 1 hit in 17 minutes, 52 seconds on ice. And we talked about this a little bit in the episode after Tuesday night's game where Michael Russo pointed out that Yakov Trenin might be a candidate to sit because of his recent play not being really where it needs to be. I can't really put Freddie Gaudreau in that category because you look at what he did, and he went 11-16 in the faceoff circle. He had an assist, and his line combination was one of the best for the Minnesota Wild the entire night. The Foligno, Gaudreau, Hartman combination for the Minnesota Wilds against the Kings. They were responsible for 1 goal for, no goals against, but listen to this. On ice, shot attempts 4. 7 for Foligno, Gaudreau, and Hartman. 1 for the opponent. Unblocked shot attempts 4 was 3 for the Wild, 1 for the Kings. And the actual shots on goal, 3 in favor of Foligno, Gaudreau, Hartman, and none for the opponent. So, as much as it would make sense to just slot Ryan Hartman in, and this has been a little bit of a problem this year so far, is it seems like you got 2 lines that are on and 2 that are off at all times. And now this Foligno, Gaudreau, Hartman line has been running pretty darn good over the last few games. And they're doing exactly what you look for in a shutdown defensive type line that can give you a little scoring punch as well. I don't really want to break that up because premier defensive line that can also give you some scoring, that has value, especially in your bottom 6. So I'm not as prone to wanting that combination to all of a sudden be broken up for the sake of trying to fix another problem. It is a problem that the top 6 is a little bit on the tilt the last few games, and the top 2 lines especially got worked pretty good by the top combinations for the Los Angeles Kings. Although Johansson, Eriksson, and Boldy were not responsible for a goal, they were out attempted 11-7, and the actual shots on goal was 5-2 in favor of the Kings. Kaprizov, Rossi, and Zuccarello, they were responsible for a goal against. They were out attempted 11-5. Tinkering, we saw John Hines do a little bit of that over the course of the night. We saw a lot of different combinations beyond those few. We saw Boldy, Rossi, Zuccarello for a little bit. We saw Kaprizov, Gaudreau, Zuccarello for a little bit. Hartman, Rossi, Zuccarello. We saw just a ton of different combinations utilized by John Hines to try to find something that sticks. But I will definitely tell you that there were a few of these combinations that were really not great at all. Now, in terms of shot attempts for, the lines that had the most against the Kings were Johansson, Eriksson, and Boldy, and Foligno, Gaudreau, Hartman. They each had 7. Kaprizov, Rossi, Zuccarello had 5. Lauko, Huznadinov, Trenin had 3. Kaprizov, Eriksson, and Boldy got a little run. They had 3 shot attempts. Johansson, Gaudreau, and Boldy had 3. And so I think, as much as I want to just simply say that it's easy to plug in one player to that second line, remove Johansson, and just assume that all the problems are going to be fixed, it might not even be that simple, because I think this is what we were hoping to avoid when not going to Kaprizov, Boldy, and Eriksson to start the season, was the hope that you could get a top six that was performing at peak levels to where you could afford to keep Kaprizov and Zuccarello together, for worry that if you split them up, that then Zuccarello's performance is going to really dip. It's a conundrum that I think will hopefully be fixed by just working harder against the San Jose Sharks. But it's starting to become a trend again. And for Marcus Johansson, you look at the number of expected goals for him in that game. Surprisingly, it was at 61.5%. And so I'm to the point where I think it may just be something that I will never understand, because Matt Zuccarello's expected goals was at 7.2%, which is atrocious. But Johansson at a 61.5 expected goals percentage. His Corsi percentage was at 54.8. All of the numbers suggest that he's doing everything that the team would like, and maybe that's why he continues to get put in that spot. But the statistics just don't match the actual production. The analytics are telling one story, and the eye test is telling you a very different one. So I really don't know what to take from all of that, other than that that has to be the reason that he continues to get put in those spots, even though we continue to see the numbers that we do. It's now the last 10 games, just 1 goal, 1 point for Marcus Johansson in the last 10 games. For a top 6 spot in the lineup, that is not even remotely close to enough. And that's why we're starting to see the offense come unraveled a little bit over the last few games. And it's starting to become a little harder to score 5-on-5. Also becoming a lot harder to score on the power play. So there are a few things that are starting to mold a little bit. But it just will require some additional tweaking to get things to where they need to go. And that will start tonight against the San Jose Sharks. You may hear that the Sharks are on the Wild's schedule next and say, oh, easy win. Well, I don't know if I would go that far. We'll talk about what the Sharks have been able to do over the last few weeks as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Indeed. We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. One final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to check out Locked On NHL throughout the week as well to get the lowdown on all of the biggest stories going on in the National Hockey League. Locked On NHL is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. What if I were to tell you that the San Jose Sharks were tied for the most points since October 28th with the Washington Capitals, the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Winnipeg Jets? The San Jose Sharks, ladies and gentlemen, are 4-1 in their last 5 games. They have outscored their opponents 16-12, 13.3% on the power play, and a perfect 100% on the penalty kill over the last 5 games. Now, the Minnesota Wild in that same span, they're 3-1 and have 6 points out of a possible 8. They have outscored their opponents 13-12. So both teams averaging right around the same amount of goals per game. The Wild are giving up slightly more. Here are the big numbers. Power play is at 0. Goose egg for the Minnesota Wild over the last 4 games. And their penalty kill is at 44.4%. So something's going to have to give tonight between the Sharks power play and the Wild penalty kill. And I hope it's not the Wild penalty kill giving up Sharks power play goals as the night unfolds. Wins for the Sharks over their last 5 games include beating the Utah Hockey Club 5-4. Same Los Angeles Kings that the Wild just lost to by a score of 4-2. The Chicago Blackhawks 3-2 winners. They lost to the Canucks 3-2, and their most recent win was a game against the Columbus Blue Jackets, in which they won 2-1 in overtime on the back of 49 saves by Vitek Vanacek. 49 out of 50 in the win. And the only goal that he gave up was a Kirill Marchenko third period goal to tie the score at 1 apiece. Alex Wenberg wins it in OT. But it's a Sharks team that has a lot of young talent and a couple of goalies that were, you're just not 100% sure what you're going to get for them. And Vanacek in his last 2 starts has allowed 3 total goals and has made 75 out of 78 saves over the last 2 games. So here's the thing. Here are the things that I pull from seeing those numbers is that it is a Sharks team that is certainly allowing some shots against. 31.6 for opponents per game. The Minnesota Wilds are averaging 29.8 shots per game over the last 4 games and giving up 28.8. So the Wild are limiting chances for the opponents. The Sharks are just saying, no, here you go. We'll give you a few more. But it's a Sharks team that you just can't take lightly. You can't take lightly a team that has as much young talent as the Sharks do, and they're starting to figure it out a little bit. You've got Macklin Celebrini, you've got William Eklund, you've got Will Smith in the lineup, but you also have a bunch of crafty vets in Ty Dellandrea, Barclay Goodrow, Mikhail Granlund, Luke Cunnin, Nico Sturm, all these former Minnesota Wild players that have found their way into the San Jose Sharks lineup on a regular basis. So it all comes down to just making sure that you don't jump into this game assuming that it's going to be a win. It's going to be a hard-fought battle. It's going to be a game that's, if you're not on, you're going to have a bad time. So it will be an interesting test for the Minnesota Wild to see if they are able to, get over the hump and to put what happens to them on the back burner against the Los Angeles Kings. Now, we also heard from John Hines a little bit that Mikey Milne is going to travel with the team, the 22-year-old Minnesota Wild prospect. And so I wanted to take a few minutes to just look at what he potentially brings to the table, because I think he can help in a couple of different areas if he does indeed play. And it sounds like John Hines is expecting that he will at some point due to the light performances by some players on the Minnesota Wild roster. Here's what elite prospects had to say about Milne when he was drafted. An absolute nuisance in the defensive zone. Milne scans off puck for threats and closes with force as plays develop, always taking that extra stride to make contact where others lunge with their stick from a glide. The motor never stops running with this player, making him an absolute force on retrievals, too. This also applies on the forecheck. 4 goals, 4 assists, and 8 total points for the Iowa Wild so far this season, after 8 goals in 40 games last year. In 2021-2022, he had 38 goals in 68 games for the Winnipeg Ice in the WHL, including 13 goals in 15 playoff games. So all told, 51 goals for Mikey Milne with the Winnipeg Ice in 2021-2022. I like the motor aspect and being able to come in and to just provide a spark, because I think that's a little bit of what is needed to help get some of these players that are not performing up to par, to get them back and going, is to have a younger player come in where you say, boy, this guy's given us a nice little spark. Might be something that we keep in the lineup more long term. So whether it will be tonight or whether it will be later on the trip, I wouldn't be surprised if we see another NHL debut. The team talked about him earning it for sure, earning the opportunity to travel with the team because of his recent play. And I did like what Michael Russo had to say about the Liam Ogren situation, is that because of how well the team had played so far this year, other than that spot on the second line that we routinely talk about, there just weren't any spots in the top 6 to be able to carve out regular playing time. So Ogren goes down to Iowa to at least get some consistent top line minutes. Scored already since he has come back, and that will not be the last we hear of him this season. I will be shocked if it is. But how do you respond? How do you bounce back after a lackluster game against the Los Angeles Kings? We'll find out here in a few short hours what the Minnesota Wild have in store. And it sounds like Marc-Andre Fleury in net tonight for the Wild, which means Philip Gustafsson will probably get the go tomorrow in Anaheim. And we'll see if the Wild can get back on track here tonight against the San Jose Sharks. But that will do it for today's episode. Appreciate everybody tuning in as you do each and every day of the week. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you don't already follow the show, so you don't miss out on any new episodes as we move through the rest of the season. You can find new episodes of Locked On Wild every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.